Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for Developing Executive Presence to Achieve Business and People Results. My name is Sadie Shernica, and I work at the Alumni Relations Office at the Wisconsin School of Business. We can go to the next slide, please. And even the next one, thank you. Before we get started with today's presentation, I wanted to take this time to go over a few things happening at the school that pertain to alumni, and then also go over the technology. But first, I wanted to mention that this webinar today is a part of Edge Up. Edge Up is a new collection of alumni professional development resources that help alumni sharpen their competitive advantage. So Edge Up opportunities will range from webinars, workshops, and recorded content that provide skill development free of charge to alumni. So we really hope that you'll get involved in those offerings. Our next one is going to be on July 20th, and that's on strategic planning. So if you're interested in learning more about strategic planning, formulation, mindset, you can find that registration on our webpage at business.wisc.edu/alumni/events. It will be a really great one, so we're looking forward to that. And then I also wanted to take a moment to talk about today's technology. We're using Zoom webinar today, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Zoom. This is really similar. We'll be using the Q&A box as well as the chat. The chat's already got some activity in it, which is great. So any comments during today's presentation can be left in the chat. And if you have questions for Tara throughout the presentation, we ask that you please leave those in the Q&A box. So we'll be answering those throughout, and hopefully that will lead to a really nice discussion. And so now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Tara, and invite her to join me on camera. Hello, welcome, Tara.
Hi.
Hello, Tara is an executive consultant and coach with Stewart Leadership who specializes in executive presence, leadership, and career coaching. Prior to joining Stewart Leadership, she worked for the Wisconsin School of Business, as well as GE Healthcare in finance, sales, and talent acquisition. Tara is a Gallup certified strengths coach, Stewart certified in Lead Now, and is a PCC level certified with the International Coaching Foundation. She has an MBA from Kellogg at Northwestern and her BBA from the Wisconsin School of Business at UW-Madison. Welcome, Tara. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sadie. Well, hi, everyone. So excited to spend some time with you today to focus on executive presence. As leaders and professionals, how do we improve ourselves? We're asking this all the time. Where do we start? I'm going to share a story about a gold miner. So we're going to go back a few years. This is a story of a merchant back in 1849 who was caught up in the California gold rush fever. He trekked across America to the gold fields of California to seek his fortune. He had dreams of the rivers in California being filled with gold nuggets so big that they could hardly be carried. Day after endless day, this young man dipped his pan into the river and came up empty. All he had was a growing pile of rocks. He was discouraged and broke and ready to quit. And then one day, an older, wiser prospector said to him, "That's quite a pile of rocks you've got there." The young man replied, "There's no gold here. I'm ready to quit." Walking over to the pile of rocks, the old wise prospector said, "Oh, there's gold in there, all right. You just have to know where to find it." He then picked up two of the rocks from the pile and smashed them together. One of the rocks split open, revealing several flecks of gold sparkling in the sunlight. Noticing a bulging leather pouch fastened to the prospector's waist, the young man said, "No, I'm not looking for flecks of gold. I'm looking for large chunks of gold like the ones you have." The old prospector extended his pouch toward the young man, who looked inside, expecting to see several large, shiny nuggets. But he was stunned to see that the pouch was filled with thousands of small flecks of gold. The old prospector said, "Son, it seems to me you're so busy looking for large nuggets that you're missing filling your pouch with these precious flecks of gold. The accumulation of these little flecks is what has brought me great success and wealth." It's common for leaders to look for a single experience that will vault them into success. They misunderstand how true leadership and executive presence are created. Real and lasting improvements are developed one small step at a time, or one tiny fleck of gold at a time. One small behavior change can make a world of difference. It just takes intention and patience. So from small and simple things, major gains happen. So today, my hope with you and our time together is that you identify 1, 2, maybe even 3 positive behavior actions that you can commit to that'll move the needle towards your goals and achieving the executive presence that you're striving for. So jot down some of these ideas along the way today. We're going to cover 4 primary goals in our time together. We're going to simply define what is executive presence. We're going to share a 4-part framework to bring it to life. You'll start to personally design a development plan related to these incremental behavior changes that'll allow you to start achieving your executive presence goals. And then we'll share a little bit about how other organizations are bringing in some of this development to make a long-lasting impact in their organizations. When I led a recruiting team earlier in my career, I'd heard hundreds of times, it's important that we find the right fit. You know, we're always looking for that right fit. Well, our team worked really hard to understand, what does fit mean? What does it mean to the company, to that actual hiring manager, to the team? This word fit was almost mysterious until we started connecting it with competencies, mindsets, behaviors. What are you really looking for to ensure that fit? I think the same can be true with executive presence. In executive coaching engagements, time and time again, we hear, I need to improve my executive presence. Well, what does this mean? So let's hear from you. Using the group chat, type in words or phrases that define what executive presence might mean to you personally. And Sadie, I don't know if it would be helpful, should they make sure it says that everyone can view it?
Yeah, that would be great. I think that will kind of give some people your thoughts, and it's nice to share.
Yeah, great. Yep, I do see people are changing that to everyone. All right, so what are we saying? Yeah, how you show up every day, being heard, visionary, being perceived with competence, composure. Yeah, this word confidence is going to come up time and time again. Gravitas, that's a new word that we're hearing a lot about. Professionalism, polished, and the list goes on and on. And so even though we all have these definitions, how do we align them to behaviors? And that's our goal today, is to kind of put a little method to the madness here for all of you. Thinking about what executive presence means to us individually brings us to the idea of what it means to others, meaning their perceptions. We all have our own thoughts and feelings, and from those thoughts and feelings, we act and behave in different ways. And then those behaviors are perceived by others. Thus, the value of a 360 assessment, because you get to see all of those views. It's critical that as developing leaders that we become aware of our blind spots. This is where our self-assessment isn't in alignment with what others are perceiving. So I'll bring this to life with an example. I'm working with a leader right now who is running 100 miles an hour, is in a huge growth organization. He takes advantage of every single minute, and in his desire to finish that last task or promptly reply to that, one more email, he's routinely late to meetings. So he's viewing his actions as being fueled by productivity and results oriented. How do you think he's being perceived by others when he arrives 5 to 6 minutes late, time and time again? The feedback is that he's unorganized, that he views his time as being more important than anyone else's. He's not being perceived as having strong executive presence. So regardless of our own internal motivations, it's the perceptions of others that really matter. Let's jump into what we'll refer to as the executive presence model. The first quadrant is all about how you show up, primarily communication. verbal, nonverbal. It's not about conforming or not being true to your authentic self. It's about being intentional. So my favorite word in that description is this idea of being intentional. The second is how you decide. A leader must make effective decisions in order to deliver excellence and achieve results. This takes us into managing emotions. A leader must manage their emotions to build trust and to truly be viewed as that role model leader. And then lastly, how you inspire. A leader must align others around a compelling vision to really effectively lead change and engage and inspire. So in reviewing these 4 quadrants, how you show up, how you make decisions, how you manage emotions, and how you inspire, what is the one area that if you were to focus on only one, what would it be? There's a poll that's launched for you to make your selection, and we'll see how the attendees here today are, what might be their interest and focus.
Yeah, we also had a question come in during that
Sure.
time that I thought we'd go over now. And the
Great.
question is, how do you balance late when your manager is the culprit?
I wonder if that's the manager's, the one that is keeping the person so they can't get away to, to get to the meeting on time, or if it's the leader, that manager, who's actually the one being late. Regardless, my personal approach is you find what I'll call a safe place, the right time, and you have a conversation. At Stewart Leadership, we call this 2-step feedback. We talk about a behavior or a fact and the impact that it's having. So I might say to my boss, Daniel, when we're running up to the very start of a meeting, and I walk into that room late, I feel like I'm sending a message that my time is more important than theirs. And just have that frank conversation and do it in a way where you're seeking advice. Like, how should I handle it when I walk in late and I feel like I'm leaving this impression that my time is more important than theirs? And so I'm one to really recommend that you address something head on, but you stick to a fact or a behavior and the impact of that behavior. And then seek advice, and then you're playing to their wisdom, their insight, and it might come across in a way that's very professional.
Awesome.
Happy to continue to explore that. Sorry, go ahead, Sadie.
Oh, I just said, awesome, thank you. And I think our poll has just wrapped up.
Wow, look at that. We're all across the board, really equally divided. And you know what I love about the answer to how everybody was so different and unique in how they answered this is what this framework does. It allows you to bring executive presence to have some core fundamental foundation of a meeting, but then you tailor your development actions to what's most relevant for you. So I was working with a leader once who was focused on executive presence, but she was an amazing decision maker. So that wasn't part of her development. So yes, this acts as a foundation, but it's most important that you tailor it to your own needs. So thank you all. All right, so let's look at this first quadrant. So a half-day workshop or an all-day session is going to cover all of these things. We're going to give you just a little kind of sample of some key insights that relate to just a couple of them. And some of these definitions may have showed up in the chat earlier. So how you show up. This is about commanding a room. First impressions are so important here. Polished professional, dressing for success, but again, in alignment with your intention, not conforming or not being true to your authentic self, just being intentional. Projecting confidence. This is huge. We hear this time and time again. And also knowing that all communication is important, not just verbal, not just presentation, but also email. We do so much of our communication by email. It has a huge impact on our personal brands, thus our executive presence. Listening, moving, zooming around, simply being visible. and acting appropriately and respectfully with others, where we hear a lot there with sarcasm, jokes, things like that. How do we better manage being respectful in our communications and how we show up? So Dr. Amy Cuddy is a social psychologist who introduced a concept of how body language alone can directly impact your confidence. So she has YouTube videos, TED Talks, etc., that talk about her research with the power pose. It shows that you can reconfigure your brain through a 2-minute high power pose before an important presentation, meeting, etc. This high power pose leads to more assertiveness and confidence. And it's through these tiny tweaks where big changes occur towards projecting confidence. And I will tell you, even from my time working back at the university, I did a lot of presentations and I would do this power pose before any type of presentation. So being very truthful with you, I did it before our time together today. So yeah, tiny tweaks can make a big change. And then active listening. So your first impression might be, oh, active listening, like we're way past that. You would be surprised at how many leaders are focused on listening. When a leader is a good listener, the correlation to their executive presence is astounding. And to be a good listener, there's no multitasking allowed. I was having a call the other day. This is an absolute true story. I heard the person typing on the other end of the line. They could have been taking notes, but we weren't really talking about anything that would have required taking notes. I felt that they were distracted and the typing noise actually distracted me. That is not, what I mean by active listening. So hearing is the physical ability, while listening is a skill, an important one, and it's one that can be improved with intentional effort. It's about understanding what someone is saying, the meaning behind the words, while also listening for what is not being said. Successful listening sends the message that you care about the individual with whom you're conversing with. One of the most common ways this occurs is through paying attention to verbal cues, both from the speaker and yourself. You want to maintain eye contact. Be careful not to interrupt. Wait until the person is completely finished and then ask questions. Adapting body language is really important. If someone's kind of leaning in, you might want to kind of lean in. If someone's a little more casual, laid back, you might want to, adapt to that. As much as possible, sit still when listening. It implies that you're giving them your full attention. And a nod with your head when you're in agreement. Something like that can be very supportive. A good listener knows that being attentive to what the speaker doesn't say is as important as being attentive to what they do say. So look for those nonverbal cues such as facial expressions and posture. We've all learned that 80% or more of communication is nonverbal. Only 20% consists of the spoken word. Yet look at all the emphasis that is placed on the latter. What this really means is that if you listen only with your ears, you will miss the large majority of the message. Well-trained eyes will tune in to these nonverbal signals. Nonverbal communication includes facial cues, body language, and then emotions like anger, frustration, happiness, surprise, hurt, and so on. The inability to see and understand these signals can significantly diminish a leader's ability to understand others. It hinders effective communication, not to mention just lack of trust in relationships. So although listening seems pretty straightforward, it is something that very senior level leaders are working on in their development plans in executive coaching engagements.
Tara, we have a question that's came in kind of related to that. The question is, what if the person or superior that you want to listen to you is the one that does not listen well? So kind of maybe a bigger personality and just not a great listener.
Well, I truly believe that we can only control our own behaviors and not the behaviors of others. And we learn a lot about leadership and executive presence from bad behaviors. I mean, some of the highest leadership, skills I've learned is by learning what not to do. So if there is trust in that relationship, and again, you can give kind of that two-step feedback, when this occurs, it makes me feel this way. So behavior impact, that's a nice way to give direct feedback, but I certainly understand we have to be careful. Not everybody is open to feedback, or it might not feel appropriate. I had a leader who never had his cell phone ever out when I was talking with him. And it meant so much. And I viewed that as like a role model behavior. But if I had a leader who was on the phone the whole time we were chatting, I probably just wouldn't work for that person for very long. But at the end of the day, I learned what not to do. So that's a tough one, Sadie.
Yeah, we had another one too.
Sure.
What changes are maybe more impactful if all of these persons' meetings are taking place via Zoom?
Okay, Sadie, read that one more time because I want
Yeah.
to find out what I think it's listen. Is it related to listening?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Not specifically, but what changes are more impactful if all our meetings are via Zoom? So I think that was.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is important. And, again, I'm doing this verbal 360 right now. And one of the tips that or not tips, one of the feedback I'm learning is that the person is multitasking during Zoom meetings. Like everybody can tell if you're looking down and you're on your phone, or if you're typing, or if you're looking over at your second screen. And, I think if you're truly want to be perceived as a good listener, you truly have to focus and be in that moment. And if you can't be in that moment, perhaps you don't attend that meeting, because you're kind of doing yourself a disservice if you're trying to multitask and do it all.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and we've all been there. I mean, we all have to multitask from time to time. It's more just what is the routine versus, the exception. So these are some tips for active listening. I mean, there's a lot here. Again, the idea or my hope for you is that you're jotting down just one or two things that you can try. So when collecting information from stakeholders that are in your kind of sphere of influence, it's important that you're an active listener and truly seek to understand the information that they're providing to you. Active listening will contribute to your brand, how people perceive you, and so on. So again, there's some tips here if they are thought starters for you to take something on for yourself, because hopefully that's the goal for today. All right, so we're going to move into this how we decide. So a leader must make effective decisions in order to deliver results. And one of my favorite ideas here is defining a problem before going after solving it. Providing clear expectations. Prioritization is huge. When people have 120% of work on their plate, prioritization comes up time and time again as being important. Seeking multiple perspectives and valuing those perspectives, even just having a point of view. Again, focus on results, and then making clear and effective decisions. So one of my favorite leadership gems is a problem well defined is a problem half solved. I think we'd all agree that executive presence requires clear and concise communication, and related to decision making, it's the same concept. It has to be a clear and concisely defined definition of the problem. So an exercise for later, you can just kind of make a note of this. Think about a problem that you're solving or facing right now in your role. Create a problem statement or a problem statement description. Regardless of the number of words, if it's 20, 30, 40 words, whatever that looks like, try to transition it into a 5-word statement. Ask yourself if the 40-word statement and the 5-word statement are addressing the same issue. How does the 5-word statement differ from the 40-word statement? Is there extra information in the previous statement that make it difficult to identify? How does this activity relate to defining problems in the workplace? So there are, this is a great exercise to say, how concise and concrete can I be? Because the more defined you are in what the problem is that you're solving, the more clear you'll be able to translate the expectations to your team and to others. Another leadership gem, which is my favorite, I'll just kind of read you this passage here. Leaders often assume they have the right answer. They may go into a meeting or small group discussion believing they already know the solution or appropriate steps to take. Consequently, they will feel little need to genuinely seek the views of others. Their people can sense this and will feel undervalued. Overusing this leader is always right approach can prevent critical insights and alternative suggestions from others. During a given day, tally how many times you ask others what they think. The total might surprise you. Set a goal to improve this behavior with your team and/or with each employee by using these magic words more often. Commit to increasing the frequency with which you ask these 4 words. I was working with a chief sales officer this past year, and she was working on valuing others and improving her listening skills. One behavior she was focused on was related to problem solving and making decisions. She stopped sharing her idea first, and in meetings, instead, she waited until everybody else in the room participated. She ensured the problem was well defined and asked, "What do you think?" More times than not, her idea was also that of someone else's in the room. She was able to recognize, share credit, and get the team energized around the proposed solution. But it wasn't her idea, it was somebody else's. So you can imagine how this change in behavior impacted the perception of others related to her executive presence. In summary here, a leader must make effective decisions in order to deliver excellence and achieve results. Defining a problem well and ensuring you are getting input from others and valuing that input are simply 2 ideas to support your improvement in this particular quadrant. In executive coaching, I had a leader put a Post-it note on his computer that said, "What do you think?" or "What would you do?" And that was just a reminder every day to think, I don't have to have the answers. I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And in fact, it's better if you're not, because you can build trust with your team and showing that you value their input. All right, moving into the 3rd quadrant, how you manage emotions, which is so important in building trust and being viewed as that role model leader. This closely ties to accepting, giving, and asking for feedback. Managing our ego, valuing others, behaving with integrity, accepting responsibility, and also recognizing and sharing credit, being resilient, high leadership EQ, and more. Daniel Goleman is an internationally known psychologist who authored the book Emotional Intelligence. I'm guessing most of us business badgers have heard of this. He defines it as your ability to recognize, understand, and use the role of emotions to manage yourself and your relationships. It was his goal to teach people to tune into their emotions with intelligence and to expand their circles of caring. This impacts self-awareness, self-regulation, self-motivation, empathy, social awareness, and social skills. There's so much packed in here. So a very easy, in-the-moment EQ check that I can share with you today is to ask yourself 3 vital questions. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? And does this need to be said now? Bringing this to life, I can share a story about a leader who had a habit of kind of firing off an email, at all times of the night that maybe came across as feeling defensive or kind of supporting his own personal interests. And he knew it. I mean, he acknowledged it and he was working on it. And so one of the, again, very simple behaviors, one of the behaviors he committed to was not replying to an email until 3 hours had passed. That allowed him to think about thoughtfully how he wanted to reply. He would draft the email and then revisit it before he hit send. And if it was something that kind of had his blood going and you kind of know that you're getting a little fired up about something, he made a commitment to sleeping on it. So by delaying his responses, reading the email, an hour after it was drafted to ensure the tone came across as he intended, and then sleeping on the ones that were a little bit more serious, he was able to drastically change how he was being perceived in managing his emotions. And quite frankly, we get fired up in that moment, but after an hour or two passes, we're cooled off a little bit. And so why not just have some patience and commit to a behavior to simply delay that confrontation until you've wound down a bit.
Tara, a question's come in that I think kind of
Sure.
relates to this quadrant.
Sure.
The question is if you're new to a company that's male dominated, do you match the executive presence you observe and receive? Like things kind of like multitasking or maybe some email language behavior. And if not, would you say that's not a culture or personality fit?
There's a real importance around inclusivity and feeling like you can be your true self in that environment without having to conform. Now, that being said, there can be challenges. I've been the only female on a team of 14 men before. That has its challenges. But I'll tell you, there's you want to find ways to be your true authentic self, but yet also finding a way to be valued in that organization. So so Sadie, will you do me a favor and just read it one more time? There's
Sure.
a lot in there.
Yep, hold on one second. If you're new to a company that's male dominated, do you match the executive presence you observe and receive? For example, multitasking, email language behavior, etc. And if no, would you say that's not a culture personality fit?
Yeah, I say you don't want to try to just match it. You might try to live in it and survive in it, but
Right.
we're not going to emulate bad behavior. Like I'll tell you, I coached a gentleman who was in a very fast-paced industry. It was commercial construction, and he had a lot of kind of perfectionism, driving towards results, little room for error, and he said, well, hey, this is my industry. This is how my bosses do it. This is how I lead. And I looked at him and I said, this might be industry specific. It might be very male dominated, but 15 people still have to work for you. And they need to be engaged and inspired and feeling aligned with your direction. And so I think sometimes that can just be an easy excuse to say, well, I'm not going to change that. This is my industry. Well, I don't know if that makes it okay. So
Right.
I would say, my advice would be you don't conform. You kind of learn and find ways to have an impact, but not necessarily emulate behavior that isn't role model leadership type behavior.
Right. We also had one more question come in that
Sure.
kind of fits here. Are there any special considerations that a leader should make with regards to generational differences and how each generation may perceive executive presence differently?
Yeah, there's kind of a debate around this as far as, differences in generations, because at the core of it, we kind of all want the same thing. My generation is known for like working really hard and productive and, measuring ourselves through results and productivity, where maybe earlier generations or younger generations are focused more on fulfillment and purpose. Well, come on, I want to be fulfilled and have purpose too, So I think there is, yes, there's some general stereotypes that are generation specific, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of overlap. And so I don't know exactly how to answer that, Sadie.
I think that's great. Thank you.
I think a lot of the generational gaps are around how people want to be communicated with. But even so, my 21-year-old son, he picks up the phone and he calls me. He won't text, which I find that weird because everybody else, I'm being told he shouldn't be calling me. So, we'll be careful of the exceptions, but certainly understand that those differences in even each, and, your goal as a leader is to understand how each and every individual wants to be communicated with. How do you work with them for them to show up as their best selves every day? And that's unique one by one, not necessarily in generational buckets.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, so 15 signs you're emotionally intelligent. Like, I'm not telling you, you got to look through this checklist and start saying, yep, I do that, I have that, I have that. The idea, again, is to just find something that you can say, yeah, I'm gonna work on that. So if you look at, you don't seek perfection. I have a client that's working on this now. An engineering background, talks about analysis paralysis, acknowledges that it can happen. And, he's digging into his fears as to what's kind of hindering his confidence in making that decision. Like, what's he afraid of? And so I view these as sort of thought starters for you to start thinking about, is there something I could do, a small behavior change, effective today or tomorrow, right? These aren't big golden nuggets that, I'll work on that next July. No, these are little things you can do today or tomorrow to really improve yourself, both business and people results. One of my favorite concepts is leadership language. It has a huge impact on executive presence. I'll give you just a couple of quick tips here. Passive language can be a derailer to your executive presence, and it showcases a lack of confidence. And earlier in my career, I was guilty of this. I might say something like, I think we should go with option A, or maybe we should go with option B. I don't know, what do you think? And then in turn, I changed it to, let's go with option A. Let's go with option B. The research showed that that's the highest quality and most of highest value. Like, instead of I think, let's change it to let's go with, and simply find ways to change your language from passive to a slightly more assertive and confident. And a second tip I'll share is this word but. It can come across as so negative. Instead of saying, I heard your idea, but we don't have funding, change it to, I heard your idea and I look forward to hearing your funding solutions. It shows you're more open-minded, that you're not, the word but completely negates everything else that was said earlier in the sentence. So through small language changes, you can drastically improve your executive presence. All right, our last quadrant is how you inspire. A leader must align others around a compelling vision, and a lot is discussed around alignment all the way downstream, from the senior level leaders to the directors, to the managers, to the frontline leaders, and so on, to every employee. We have to be able to align around the vision and the direction the organization is moving. Confidence under fire, a compelling vision, not just having one, but communicating it, being that consistent and clear message. Utilizing storytelling, this is huge. So we're going to talk about this a little bit today. Builds alliances, organizational savvy. How do we get work done without having that direct authority of every resource? Instilling risk-taking in others, challenging the status quo, and just creating a high-performance environment. But again, focused on business results, yes, but also people results. Again, I'm guessing most business badgers are going to have heard of Simon Sinek. One of the most important pieces of clarity you need to provide your employees is all around the why. Why do we do business? Why do we do what we do? So Simon Sinek has the power of why, where he shares that customers don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. It's incredibly compelling through storytelling. People are more engaged when they can align with the purpose. His quote here is, profit isn't a purpose, it's a result. Purpose is the reason we do the thing that makes the profit. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? A leader's ability to inspire is commonly linked to a change initiative. I mean, transformation, change, disruption, and inspiration needs to be a huge part of those change initiatives, which highly involves effective communication. So I love Patrick Lencioni's quote here: great leaders see themselves as chief reminding officers every day, over and over again. Do not confuse the transfer of information to an audience with the audience's ability to understand, internalize, and embrace the message that's being communicated. We all know that. I mean, we can email, we can present, we can share it in a town hall, we can put up a flyer, but you're still going to get people who didn't get the message. So it has to be consistent and ongoing. And again, that's where that clarity going from a 40-word statement to a 5 can really help with the consistency of a message. The only way for people to embrace a message is to hear it over and over a period of time, in a variety of different situations, and preferably from different people. So the best leaders know that they need to set the direction for the organization and ensure that people are reminded of it. I once coached a surgeon just a few years ago. He was struggling in his relationships at work and was focused on positivity because he couldn't afford to get burned out in his career. One of the behaviors he committed to do was to send 3 emails a week to people thanking them and appreciating something without asking for anything in return. In the very first week, he emailed the head of facilities thanking his team for their quick and quality work in getting the HVAC system fixed in one of his operating rooms. Apparently, clean air is really important in an operating room. Within a couple of hours, this email that he had sent ended up in the hands of the CEO of the hospital, who in turn mailed it back to this surgeon, expressing how much this email meant to the facilities team. The doctor couldn't believe it, and he actually forwarded that email to me and said, wow, this stuff works. In our next coaching session, he shared this experience with an enormous smile, saying, wow, who knew this would have this kind of impact? After a few months of executive coaching and seeing the impact of very small behavior changes on his team, his patients, peer physicians, his family, he said to me, imagine what healthcare could be like if every doctor had an executive coach. Stories inform, influence, and inspire action. Boring meetings, lackluster, unmemorable presentations, unable to influence action, having endless debates about data and then more data. Turn to business storytelling to engage and influence your audience, move people to action, share your memorable message with strategy and style. It can be done. Karen Eber has a 14-minute TED Talk highlighting how data doesn't change behavior, but that emotions do. It's a powerful TED Talk that brings this concept to life. She encourages stories to answer the following 3 questions. What is the context? What is the conflict? And what is the ultimate impact or outcome? Stories are a fantastic way to connect with people, and combined with data, come together to help you see things differently and tap into your emotions. Data just isn't enough. So this approach will help you build trust, inspire, improve your executive presence, and more. Here's just a few tips on how to tell a great story. And it really starts with the message. Every storytelling exercise should begin by asking, who is your audience? What is the message you want to share with them? Are you able to boil it down to a compelling single statement? So for example, if you're trying to convince senior leaders to take a risk by supporting your project, you could convey that most companies are built on taking smart chances. Settle on your ultimate message, then you can figure out the best way to bring it to life. And mind your own experiences. The best storytellers look to their own memories and life experiences for ways to illustrate their message and show your vulnerability. I mean, every example I've shared with you today, based on working with a leader, it's a true experience in my coaching practice. I didn't take somebody else's story and pretend like it was mine. It would have been so much harder to share with you. Don't make yourself the hero. You may not want to be the star of your own story. That might not interest everyone, but you can be a central figure. The ultimate focus should be on the people you know, lessons you've learned, events you've witnessed, and so on. Highlight a struggle. A story without a challenge simply isn't very interesting. As Karen emphasizes in her TED Talk, good stories need a conflict. And keep it simple. You don't have to go crazy on the details. It doesn't have to be unexpected or out of this world. Some of the most successful and memorable stories are relatively simple and straightforward. Don't let details detract from your core message. And practice makes perfect. Storytelling requires repeated effort to get it right. You can practice with friends, loved ones, trusted colleagues. When people are working on this as like executives, we talk about just practicing in your phone or recording yourself through Zoom. Nobody else has to see it, it's just you. But practice really does make this much easier.
We have a few questions coming in, Tara.
Sure.
Yeah, one question we just got about executive presence and the difference for men and women. So to be effective, do women need to apply executive presence in different or nuanced ways? And do you feel like those differences do exist?
So, this is, oh gosh, we need another webinar. So yes, this is important. This is a big one. And I think, a couple things come to mind. One is on executive presence. Gosh, Sadie, I feel like I want you to read it one more time. Just read it real quick.
Absolutely. Is executive presence different for men and women? To be effective, do women need to apply executive presence in different or nuanced ways?
Yeah. Okay. So I think women just maybe have some perceptions that we need to overcome. A great example comes from, this was a session at the university a few years ago where the chief of police said, she was a female, and she said, when my male counterpart would say, hey, I have to leave at 3:30 to pick up my kid, it was perceived as, oh, what a committed dad. Like, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And when she says, hey, I got to leave at 3:30 to pick up my kid from school, it's perceived as, oh, her priorities are out of line. And so, what we're up against this, she's not as committed to her work and so on. So, we have that. And I think as leaders, we can change that through a lot of intentional efforts on our own teams so that we can change some of those types of perceptions and behaviors in professional workplaces. I know another woman who was told she needed to upgrade her wardrobe and her clothes. And, she gives a leadership talk for me now. And she's like, you can do 3 things with feedback. You can take it into consideration and make change. You can put it in a parking lot because you're still thinking about it, or you can throw it back and say, not interested. And she's like, when I got that advice that I needed to buy a more expensive handbag, I threw it back. So I mean, there's a lot packed in there, and I would say that different team, all really unique circumstances and situations.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Barbara asks, and what about people maybe who don't self-identify as either one specifically? Any other different approaches there?
I mean, the current environment is all around making every person in the organization feel valued and welcomed and belonging. Mm-hmm. And so whatever behaviors the leadership and the team can do to ensure that happens. And, chief people officers are working on this across the globe. Mm-hmm. and moving the needle in these areas. So I think it's all about being unique to yourself. Now, I had a situation where this was really a perplexing situation because somebody was interviewing and they weren't advancing in the interview stage. And I said, well, you need to be likable. Like when you're interviewing, do these things. And he's like, well, hey, you're telling me not to be my authentic self. And we went back and forth on perceptions and behaviors and how you need to fit in, but yet you need to be your authentic self. And it was a really challenging conversation. And I finally said, for a light bulb to go off, I said, if you have a toxic leader who delivers amazing results, they don't get to show up as their true authentic self because it's toxic. And so, I'm not an expert in this area. I am passionate about these types of questions and conversations, but I'm not an expert, but I am passionate about making sure leaders build practices and have a style that welcomes all input, and feedback can be openly shared and transparent. Comes with a lot of trust, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So bringing this together here, the model on the left side of the screen, how you show up, how you decide, how you manage emotions, and how you inspire. We want to ensure that different perspectives come from different relationships in your sphere of influence professionally. Your boss might be more focused on business results, performance, goals, things like that. Your direct reports, they care about people results, teaming, their development, promotion, advancement opportunities, how you communicate, how transparent you are, feeling valued, being seen. Peers are about internal results, resources, and the allocation of those resources. How is the work getting done? How are we supporting each other? And then your customer cares about the competitive landscape, your external results and commitments, trends, customer service, timeliness, quality product, and more. So reflect on how your executive presence is perceived differently by each of these varying relationships. And again, something that you can take forward with you is this relationship mapping exercise, where you simply list your key relationships by name, what they value, what you believe their perception is of you, how frequently you interact with them, or how frequently you should interact with them, and any desired changes. And from this exercise, which might take 10 minutes, you might identify one or two really quick changes that you can make that would allow you to improve your executive presence. For one leader, it was as simple as quit canceling one-on-ones. It was sending a horrible message. And then weeks would go by before he interacted with his team members. So this is just a really simple analysis you can do for yourself. It should take you, I'd say, 6 to 10 minutes, and something that you can take forward as a way to continue this work. And then lastly, I'll share with you a 10-month effort that started out in a US services company with some self-assessment. It was a cohort of 13 leaders. They started with a self-assessment in order to tailor this more fundamental approach for the larger group. They had started off with this self-assessment, then they did a half-day workshop on the one quadrant, some peer coaching to share and learn from each other, sort of peer-to-peer feedback, another workshop, coaching, etc. So this is kind of like a learn, apply, learn, apply, learn, apply approach over a 10-month period. A nice way to bring in executive presence, dribble it in a little bit over time, and actually see behavior change. So the CEO recently cited that program as one of the top 3 accomplishments for the company. It ended with a capstone presentation type project. So these leaders had high visibility. They're being sought after for promotion, growth, and advancement opportunities. I'm guessing a lot of those of you out in the audience today are seeing your organizations tap into their people, giving them more responsibility than perhaps they're ready for. And a program like this can help support their readiness to do so and instill their confidence that they're ready. So again, just want to share, how can you bring something like this into your own organization? And you can custom design this to whatever parts of executive presence appeal to your leaders the most. So with that, we've got to, take some action here, or else I wouldn't be doing my job. It's my greatest fear that we attend a webinar and then nothing changes. So pick one thing, pick two things. Ensure that barriers are going to be solved for in advance so that you can actually try something new. And you know what? It doesn't have to be a lot of work. I had one leader who her commitment was to smile when she entered a room because she wanted to change how she showed up. And that doesn't cost you anything, super simple. So think about something that you learned today that maybe was sort of an aha, one or two actions that you're going to take. Think about a barrier that might get in the way. And then who might help you be accountable? Who could you share that with? And we'll close here by having you type in one of the actions you're going to take into the group chat. We can all just kind of watch those scroll by, and one of those ideas might spark an interest for someone else. Like, oh, I never thought about that. That's a good idea. So enter your action into the group chat. And just want to emphasize my support of all of you on your own development journeys, and wish you the best of luck in improving your own executive presence to help you reach your career aspirations. With that, I'll turn it over to Sadie if we have a moment for Q&A. Certainly encourage all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn as a way to kind of further introductions and keep this conversation going.
Awesome. Yeah, we had a couple more questions come in from multiple people, so I thought we'd go over these first, and then later, after you guys are done putting those things in the chat, my colleague is going to put Tara's email in the chat. So if we don't get to your question today, we will definitely encourage you to email Tara so you guys can have conversations about those unanswered questions. So the first one that was kind of popular is, how do you neutralize toxic people?
Wow.
No, that's kind of a big one.
Yeah, these questions are so hard. So I mean, this is challenging, and I can only speak for my own approach on this because it's important that everybody is true to their own style. Nobody loves conflict, but really good conflict can avoid bad conflict. When somebody's toxic, there's already bad conflict. And I, again, really lean on this two-step feedback type situation. So when you interrupted this person in that meeting, it made them feel like their idea didn't matter. And so you have to give a concrete example. I work really hard not to say, you always do this, you always do that, because then you're like ganging up on me out on the playground, and that's not going to help. But if you can do two-step feedback. Now, at the end of the day, people leave organizations because of toxic employees. So hopefully this is being addressed by the leadership. But I mean, this is huge. So most people kind of, turn and run and try to avoid. If there's opportunities for you to kind of stand up and advocate for yourself or for people on your team, you try to do that the best you can, but I don't have a great answer for that one.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah.
Another popular question was, what are your thoughts on apologizing versus turning something into a positive? For example, I'm sorry I'm late versus thank you for your patience.
This has to do with how passive and assertive you are as an individual. So earlier in my career, I was very passive. I apologized for everything. And I then made an effort to quit doing that. But you can't just stop. So I would give myself a little bit of grace and say, instead of doing it, I'll do it 1 out of the 3 times when I normally would. So I tried to just lessen the times I was sorry. I have heard leaders say, I apologize for this. I don't think that's the same as saying, I am sorry. It's different. I apologize for that. Like the word apologize and I'm sorry have a different tone for me personally. I think there is a place for I am sorry when you are genuinely sorry, but not for something as trivial. So, I mean, this is about leadership language and how confident and assertive do you want to come across. So you've got to adapt that recommendation to your own, where is your baseline now? And do you need to be viewed as slightly softer because you come in too assertive and you never apologize? Or do you come in and you apologize for everything and you look passive and not very confident?
Awesome. All right, well, I think we're at time, but I want to reiterate, if we did not get to your question today, we have Tara's email in the chat. It's also in the slides that we're going to be sending out to everybody. Thank you so much, Tara, for being here. This has been so insightful, and I know the chat's been really engaged the whole time, so I know they think so too. If you have any other questions about today's webinar, you can email us. Our email's on our website, but I think that's all for today. Thanks, Tara.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate
Thanks,
the
everybody.
opportunity.
Bye-bye.